Texas, 1944. The night was still, the kind of stillness that comes just before the world changes. A faint rattle of barbed wire broke the silence. Corporal Ernst Keller pressed his face into the cold dirt and slid forward on his stomach, inch by inch beneath the fence. The metal scraped his back, leaving thin lines of blood, but he didn't stop. On the other side, the air smelled different. Dry, wild, free. Beside him, Private Otto Fuchs clutched a small tin of stolen water. "Now," he whispered. Keller nodded. They rose slowly, hearts pounding, boots sinking into dew-heavy grass. Behind them, the floodlights of Camp Hearn glowed faintly in the distance. Ahead stretched miles of empty Texas land, flat, endless, and unknown. South, Keller said. Mexico. They believed they were escaping the war. They didn't realize they were escaping into cowboy country, a place where freedom had its own laws and mercy wore a wide-brimmed hat. During World War II, more than 400,000 German prisoners of war were held across the United States. Dozens of camps dotted the plains of Texas. They were surrounded by fences, watchtowers, and a quiet truth. Most of these men would never see their homeland again. But life here wasn't what they expected. The guards weren't brutal, the food wasn't scarce, and the enemy wasn't cruel. This is the forgotten story of the two men who ran from all that and learned that the greatest strength in America wasn't its guns. It was its decency. If you love true stories that uncover humanity in the middle of history, don't forget to subscribe and let us know what part of the world you're watching from. Corporal Ernst Keller sat hunched over a rough wooden table, the dim bulb above him flickering as if unsure it wanted to shine. His fingers, calloused from years of mechanical work, traced careful lines onto a piece of scrap wood, a crude map of Texas carved with the sharp edge of a broken spoon. The smell of pine and dust hung thick in the air, mingling with faint cigarette smoke drifting in from the guards outside. Across from him sat Otto Fuchs, a nervous 20-year-old with sunken eyes and hands that never seemed to stop moving. He kept glancing at the door as if every whisper might summon a guard. 200 miles, Keller murmured, running his finger southward. Rio Grande. Freedom. His tone carried a confidence that bordered on arrogance, the kind of certainty that comes only from men who had once believed they could conquer the world. Otto frowned. "And then what? You think they'll just let us cross into Mexico?" Keller smirked faintly. "They'll never find us. The war's ending. They've already forgotten us." Around them, the barracks felt eerily calm. A group of prisoners played chess with carved pieces made from soap. Someone strummed a guitar softly, the tune of an old German folk song mixing with the hum of the guards' radios outside. The camp had rules, rations, and even music, but for Keller, peace was more unbearable than captivity. It made him feel powerless. That night, he scribbled in his diary, "The Americans are soft. They think comfort makes them strong." From the next bunk, an older prisoner named Sergeant Weber chuckled quietly. "You can escape the fences, boys," he said without looking up, "but you can't escape America." Keller didn't understand then. He thought the man was mocking him. He was wrong. The world was wrapped in darkness when Keller opened his eyes. The barracks were silent except for the faint rattle of the wind through the tin roof. Outside, a guard's boots scraped rhythmically across the gravel. 12 steps north, 12 steps south. Keller lay still, counting each one. He had listened to that same pattern every night for a week, memorizing the rhythm like a song. Tonight, that song would lead him to freedom. "Now," he whispered. Otto hesitated for only a moment before following. Together, they crept across the floor, hearts thundering so loud it felt like the whole camp might hear. The cold bit into their hands as they reached the fence. Keller's fingers wrapped around the wire, feeling the hum of the generator that powered the distant lights. He lowered himself to the ground and slid forward, the sharp metal scraping his back as he pulled himself through. Otto followed, his breath fogging in the chilled air. On the other side, the night smelled of grass and dirt, wild and unfamiliar. They crawled low, their uniforms damp with dew, until the shadow of the last watchtower disappeared behind them. Only then did Keller whisper, "Run." Their boots pounded softly against the soil, each step carrying them farther from captivity and deeper into the unknown. No shouts, no alarms, just wind sweeping across the endless plains. When the first light broke over the horizon, it painted the land in gold. The world seemed too vast, too open, There were no forests to hide in, no villages ahead, only an ocean of land that didn't care who they were. Otto pointed east. That way? Keller shook his head. South, always south. Mexico, freedom, and home. But as the sun climbed higher, that freedom began to burn. The air thickened and the horizon refused to move. Freedom, Keller realized, had no fences, but it had a price. By mid-morning, the Texas sun had become their enemy. It glared down from a cloudless sky like a burning eye, stripping the color from the world and the strength from their bodies. Keller pulled the collar of his uniform tight around his neck, though it did nothing to stop the heat. Sweat ran down his temples and stung the small cuts on his face, but he ignored it, focusing on the horizon that refused to come any closer. Their canteen was already half empty, the water inside warm and metallic. The piece of bread they had carried from the mess hall had crumbled into dry dust. Each step felt heavier, as if the land itself wanted to keep them from leaving. The fences never ended. Thin lines of rusted barbed wire running alongside the dirt road, marking off ranches that stretched for miles. Every so often, Keller stopped to scan the plains, but all he saw was shimmering heat and emptiness. Otto dragged his feet behind him, squinting against the sunlight. "You said there'd be trees," he murmured, his voice cracking. "There will be," Keller muttered, unwilling to admit he'd been wrong. But there weren't. Only grass, dust, and the smell of hot iron. Hours later, they came across the bleached bones of cattle scattered beside a dry stream bed, grim reminders of how harsh this land could be. Nearby, a rusted windmill creaked lazily in the wind, its shadow swaying across the cracked earth. Beneath it stood a dented metal tank half filled with brown algae-stained water. Keller hesitated for only a second before kneeling. "It's water," he said hoarsely. They drank greedily, ignoring the bitter taste that coated their tongues. From a distant hill, a rancher sat astride his horse, binoculars glinting in the sunlight. He watched them pause, drink, and stumble onward, two strangers wandering where they didn't belong. He didn't call the army. "Not yet. Poor fools," he murmured, lowering the glass. "They don't know what country they're in." At Camp Hearn, the day began like any other, until the count came up short. 2 empty bunks, 2 missing names. A single moment of silence, then chaos erupted. At 9:07 a.m., the camp siren tore through the morning air, its wailing echo bouncing off the barracks and the barbed wire fences. Guards sprinted to their posts, rifles slung over their shoulders. The calm, dusty rhythm of the camp was replaced by the sharp bark of orders and the growl of jeeps roaring to life. Inside the command office, the camp officer slammed a hand against the radio. 2 German prisoners missing since before dawn, possibly armed, heading south. The words crackled over the line, reaching military police posts across the region, and 1 small-town sheriff's office in Bryan County. Texas Sheriff Tom Landry was a man of few words and slower movements, built like the land he lived on, steady, sun-scorched, and unshakable. When the call came through, he didn't panic. He simply leaned back in his wooden chair, chewed the end of his matchstick, and listened. "Escaped Germans, huh?" he muttered. "In this heat?" He set the receiver down gently. "They won't get far." He stepped out onto the porch of the feed store where a handful of ranchers were swapping stories and drinking coffee. "Boys," Landry said, tilting his hat back. "Looks like we got ourselves a chase." The men laughed, but they were already standing. Boots scuffed the porch boards, saddles creaked, and within minutes 6 riders were mounting up. They weren't soldiers, and they didn't need to be. Each man there could track a coyote through rain, read hoof prints in dry dust, and tell how far a man had walked by the drag of his boots. Landry glanced south, where the plains shimmered under the sun. A faint smile crossed his face. "No need for the army," he said. "They're on our soil now." The Texas plains stretched endlessly, a sea of gold and heat that shimmered beneath the brutal afternoon sun. Dust swirled with every gust of wind, curling around the hooves of the riders who moved slowly, deliberately, men who didn't need roads or maps to know where they were going. To them, the land spoke in quiet signs. A bent blade of grass, a heel mark turned sideways, a scuffed patch of dirt near a watering hole. Sheriff Tom Landry rode at the front, reins loose in his hands, his gaze scanning the horizon with calm certainty. Beside him rode Will Turner, the youngest of the 6, his hat tilted low to block the glare. "Them Germans think they're ghosts," he said, squinting toward the distance. Landry's voice was steady, almost amused. "Ghosts leave tracks, son." The riders fanned out, each man reading the land like scripture. Where the army might see empty fields, these men saw movement, patterns written in dust. A misplaced rock, a broken twig, the faint impression of a boot dragging in exhaustion. They didn't chase with noise or engines. They followed with patience. Miles ahead, Keller and Otto trudged through the heat, unaware of the quiet hunt unfolding behind them. Their shadows grew longer, their steps slower. Otto stumbled, clutching his side, and Keller barely had the strength to pull him upright. To them, the world felt deserted, but somewhere, the land itself was whispering their story to the men who followed. By dusk, the sky turned molten orange, and the first stars blinked awake. Landry dismounted beside a shallow pond, crouching low to study the ground. His fingers brushed against a torn boot print half filled with dust. Nearby, a battered tin stamped Hearn Camp glinted faintly in the fading light. Landry straightened, eyes fixed on the horizon. "They're tired," he said quietly, his voice almost kind. "And they don't know it yet, but they're already home." The next day dawned mercilessly bright. The Texas sun had burned away every illusion of freedom the two Germans still clung to. Keller and Otto staggered through tall grass, their shadows long and broken. Their skin was blistered, lips split and bleeding, and their uniforms hung off them in rags. When they finally reached a fence line, Keller dropped to his knees, gasping. Otto fell beside him, too weak to speak. The silence was heavy until it wasn't. From somewhere beyond the haze, a sound began to grow. Slow, rhythmic, deliberate, hoofbeats. Keller's eyes snapped open. "Hide!" he hissed, grabbing Otto's arm. They scrambled toward a thicket of mesquite, crouching low, hearts hammering against their ribs. Dust shimmered in the air as the sound grew closer. Then, out of the glare, 6 riders appeared, silhouettes cut from the sunlight itself. Wide-brimmed hats, rifles hanging loosely from leather straps, their movements calm and measured. These weren't soldiers. They were men who belonged to this land, a steady voice called out, smooth as the wind. "You boys lost?" Keller froze, eyes narrowing. Otto whispered, "Soldiers?" Keller shook his head. "No," he said quietly. "Worse." At the front rode Sheriff Tom Landry, his posture relaxed, his tone casual. "You fellas from Camp Hearn?" Silence. The German stayed low, uncertain. Landry sighed, adjusting the brim of his hat. "Ain't no use hiding. We seen your tracks for 10 miles. You did good, though. Most don't make it this far." Finally, Keller stood, trembling, his hands half raised. "Don't shoot," he managed in broken English. Landry chuckled, eyes glinting. "Shoot? We didn't even bring enough bullets for coyotes." Another cowboy, Will Turner, swung down from his horse and tossed a metal canteen toward Keller. "Water first. Questions later." Keller hesitated, staring at the canteen as if it were a trick. Then he drank. The cool water hit his parched throat, burning like mercy itself. Otto followed, tears welling in his eyes. "Why help us?" Otto whispered. Will grinned, his voice lazy and kind. "Because dying in our county's bad for business." For the first time since the war began, Keller laughed, a small, broken sound carried away by the Texas wind. They were given spare horses. Their hands were tied loosely, more for formality than fear. As they rode, Will Turner asked, "You ever ride before?" Keller shook his head. "Well," Will said, "try not to fall. Sheriff hates paperwork." The men laughed. Even the prisoners smiled. At a creek stop, Landry passed around strips of jerky. "Beef," he said proudly. Otto sniffed it. "You feed prisoners?" Landry shrugged. "We feed folks. War's over soon anyway." Keller chewed slowly, tasting salt and smoke. "You treat enemies like guests." Landry's eyes narrowed kindly. "Son, mercy's cheap. Costs a man nothing to be decent." The next morning, Keller woke to the smell of bacon. For a long moment, he thought it was a dream. Sunlight slanted through the infirmary window. His clothes were folded. A cup of hot coffee steamed beside the bed. Sheriff Landry walked in carrying a plate. "You look half alive," he said. "Figure we fix that. Bacon, eggs, bread, butter, real food." Keller blinked. For us? Landry raised an eyebrow. You think I cooked this for myself? Otto woke wide-eyed. They ate in silence. Keller said softly, In Germany, this would be impossible. Landry shrugged. Hate takes time. We've got work to do. Outside, cowboys laughed as they unloaded hay. No guards shouted, no one pointed guns, just men working under the Texas sun. Otto whispered, They treat us as if the war never happened. Keller nodded. Maybe that's why they won. December arrived with cold wind and the smell of pine. The Americans decorated the mess hall with paper stars and electric lights. Then something unthinkable happened. The Texan wives brought baskets of food. Sheriff Landry called the prisoners together. Tomorrow's Christmas. Nobody eats alone. That night, a long wooden table stood under the open sky, roasted turkey, cornbread, pies, and something the Germans hadn't seen in years, butter. Otto whispered, This cannot be real. Keller looked around at the laughter, the music, the lanterns. It's real, he said, and that's what makes it unbearable. The cowboys arrived in clean shirts, carrying Coca-Cola and a barrel of beer. A guitar strummed, a harmonica joined in. Landry raised his glass. To peace and to men who made it through hell. The prisoners hesitated, then raised theirs. The sound of clinking glasses echoed across the field. Otto sipped Coke and grimaced. Too sweet, Keller smiled. Maybe that's how peace should taste. Laughter rippled down the table. For the first time, enemies shared a song instead of a battle cry. Weeks passed. Keller and Otto were assigned to the airfield repair yard, rebuilding damaged training planes. Keller ran his hand along a wing, the same kind of aircraft he once tried to destroy. A Texan mechanic named Hank grinned. You fix them better than my boys. Keller nodded. In Germany, we built for war. Here, we build to fly. At lunch, Americans and Germans sat together, sharing sandwiches and bottles of Coca-Cola. Otto whispered, They win but don't humiliate. Keller said, Because they don't fight for pride. They fight to go home. Spring came to Texas. Radios crackled with the news. Germany had surrendered. No cheers. Just quiet, relief. Sheriff Landry visited the camp one last time. You boys will be heading home soon, he said. You'll see things changed. Maybe you will too. Keller shook his hand firmly. I already have. That night, he wrote his final diary entry. America's power was not its weapons. It was the way it treated men, even its enemies, as if they still mattered. The gates opened under a silver dawn. No one ran. They simply walked. Sheriff Landry met Keller by the fence holding a small paper bag. Inside, a folded newspaper, a slice of pecan pie, and a note that read, Safe travels, friend. Keller's voice broke. You gave us more than mercy. You gave us a new way to see the world. He tipped his borrowed cowboy hat and stepped beyond the wire, not as a prisoner but as a man reborn. The camera lingers on the empty camp. Wind moves through the grass. In a war built on steel and hate, America's quietest weapon was kindness. Keller's diary would later be found in Germany. On its last page, one line was underlined twice. Freedom did not defeat us. It changed us. Fade to black, on screen. But what happened when these POWs returned to Germany and told their people what they saw? Music swells. If you believe mercy can change history, share this story. In a war built on steel and hate, America's quietest weapon was kindness. Keller's diary would later be found in Germany. On its last page, one line was underlined twice. Freedom did not defeat us. It changed us. Fade to black, on screen. But what happened when these POWs returned to Germany and told their people what they saw? Music swells. If you believe mercy can change history, share this story.